When it comes to any piece of media, a lot of things are bound to change as more ideas get presented and as further development progresses. Because of this, certain ideas or characters may end up being scrapped that could have drastically changed the story. Or maybe, the main story itself might have gone in an entirely different direction than a finalized version of release. Because of many changing factors, most of your favorite pieces of media could have ended up being vastly different in many ways that you wouldn't have expected, and in turn, that same piece of media could have very well ended up being a lot more darker originally. Whether these original ideas were for the better or for the worse, this ultimately goes to show how a single proposed idea could have caused a domino effect and changed the course of a series forever. Today, as you can read by the title, we'll be going over pieces of media that were originally intended to be darker. Now, if you don't know what The Walking Dead is, basically, it's a post-apocalyptic series that revolves around the world being overrun by zombies, or as this series calls them, walkers. Now, there is more to it, but this is the overarching story that is present in all facets of the series, and at this point, it's kinda hard to not have at least heard about the series. Anyways, The Walking Dead has many iterations of the universe within it that have formed over the years that differentiate itself from the original comic books that were made by Robert Kirkman, such as the popular TV series of the same name that loosely follows the original comics, alongside the many spin-offs that accompany the TV universe. But what we'll be focusing on for this entry will be about the video games that were made about the series, that were all developed by Telltale and Skybound Games. What makes these games unique is that they're episodic graphic adventures, meaning that you make the choices within the game, and that ends up affecting the rest of the story, and eventually, the outcome of the end. These types of games are usually split within chapters, or so-called episodes, that revolve differently from one another, such as an episode being set in a farm or in a city that all typically have different objectives to further the story. Usually, these Walking Dead games have 5 episodes that make up the whole game, which lasts around 2 hours of gameplay, and for this entry at hand, we'll be focusing on the second game of the series, which is The Walking Dead Season 2. But before that, I kinda have to give a basic rundown of the first game, as it ties back to the entry at hand and will provide a lot of context for the characters. The first game of the series is The Walking Dead Season 1, which revolves around you playing as a university professor named Lee Everett, who is on his way to prison after killing a man who slept with his wife. Eventually, while on the way to prison, the police car that Lee was being escorted on gets in a car accident in which Lee escapes and is then exposed to the horrors of the world as people are reanimated into walkers, in which, shortly after this crash, Lee rescues and subsequently takes care of a young girl named Clementine, who he found while fleeing from the crash site. Lee ends up becoming a protective figure to her and tries to help her reunite with her parents, all while Lee's teaching Clementine everything he knows about what it means to survive in this new world. And of course, that isn't every detail about the story, but that's the gist of it. And throughout the rest of the game, you meet other survivors such as Lily, who is overly bossy and possessive of the way she does things, or Kenny, who can generally be likable and caring, but can occasionally appear as stubborn and confrontational. These interactions that you do with these characters can play a huge role in how you experience the game, but ultimately, spoilers ahead, Lee gets bit and fucking dies. Okay, I got ahead of myself. Let's take that back. Throughout the rest of the game, the survivors go place by place trying to survive and to hopefully get out of the city. And as you continue playing as Lee, you see your relationship with Clementine grow as you teach her the ways of survival. You really do get emotionally connected with these characters throughout the story. But sadly, after all this, the first game ends by Lee either becoming a walker or Clementine having to unalive Lee before he turns. No choices can save Lee from this outcome. Now, with all of that mentioned, we move over to the second game of this series, The Walking Dead Season 2, which is the sequel to the first game and the continuation of Clementine's story, and also the game that we're focusing on for this entry. But of course, I have to give a basic summary of the game, so, there's a lot of context at hand. So, spoilers ahead, of course. Anyways, Clementine has aged by 3 years from the last game and she's now 11 by the second season. Similarly to the first game, you make choices and they end up affecting the story and ending in a far greater way compared to the first game. The second game starts after the events of the first season, in which Clementine regroups with Omida and Krista, who were survivors you met in the last game. During the time after Clementine reunites with Omida and Krista, Omida is killed during a rest stop. Months after this event, Krista and Clementine are basically lone wolves and are seeking refuge in a supposed safe haven called Wellington, but on their way there, they are separated by bandits, in which Krista and Clementine get separated from one another. After escaping the bandits, a lost Clementine eventually finds a new group and coincidentally finds Kenny from the last game. The rest of the game follows this new group as more tragedy keeps on occurring in the world, such as overarching villains, difficult snowy weather, and of course more walkers. All of these reasons end up causing a lot of deaths within this new group, but one of these new survivors you meet in the second game gives birth to AJ, a character who will be expanded on a lot more in the later games as he eventually becomes the second lead character in the whole series. But back to Season 2. Eventually, by the ending of the game, you are presented with a hard choice of either venturing the world by yourself with the newborn AJ, or kill one of the last survivors you're with to save the other survivor that's also accompanying you from death by their hands. Okay, that sounds like it doesn't make any sense, so just trust me, that's just what happens basically. But this can make the person you saved accompany you at the end of the game, but ultimately, the game will always end with this new batch of characters that you met throughout Season 2 dead, and Clementine surviving alongside AJ. No choices you make will ever stop Clementine from being around AJ, and caretaking him as how Lee did with her in the previous game. Alright, so now that we have the general plot of the story, you now may be saying, this is a post-apocalyptic zombie game. It already is supposed to be dark, in which, for the most part, these games are all pretty somber. Even then, the finalized ending of The Walking Dead Season 2 shows at least some solace and hope for the future for Clementine and AJ. I mean, just look at the amount of games that were put out for these characters. But surprisingly, the second game was supposed to be even darker than what was presented in the final product, with pieces of this cut version of the game still circulating online and within the game files themselves. This original plan of Season 2 would have gone in a completely different direction compared to what the final release would do, as Telltale at the time of Season 2 believed that this would have been the last Walking Dead game, so originally, they had a lot of fatality and finality within their original plans. An example of this can be seen early on in this early version of the game, as the first 20 minutes into episode 1, Clementine would have originally been shot in the arm, instead of receiving a dog bite injury as you do in the finalized version of release. There is also a lot of evidence that shows that this happened as well, as the original menu of this episode showed Clementine severely injured in her arm, with a lot of blood coming out, with Clementine looking a lot more angry and agitated. And when we compare this to the finalized version of this menu, you can greatly see the difference and understand what I meant by Clementine looking a lot more angry and agitated. Like, damn, chill. Anyways, this original Season 2 would have also made Kenny, a beloved character from the first season and one of the survivors that you reunite with later in the game, become the main enemy of the game, which, as you guessed, vastly different compared to the final version where Kenny remains a companion to you all the way up until your final choice at the end of the game. Even though everything I just said didn't seem all that dark, we're now going to get into why people refer to this as the dark version of the story, which is mostly due to what I'm about to say next, and that's that there was an infamous rumor going around that claimed that Clementine, at the final stretch of this original version of the story, would have been by one of the enemies you encounter. Mind you, Clementine at this point is still a young child, but thankfully this has been debunked as just a disgusting rumor that went too far. But for a good while, people believed that this was true because the enemy who would have supposedly done this horrendous act had been implied in the game to be a relatively weird guy. But fortunately, there was never any confirmation that this was even intended to happen. But still, it's horrible to even think that people believe this disgusting rumor was true. And even if it was, it would have also greatly diminished a lot of replayability to that certain episode. But the darkest part that was revealed to have actually been true and actually thoroughly thought of would have been the horrifying way the game would end. This original ending of the game's final episode will be called Better to Sleep, instead of No Going Back as the finalized version of the game will call its ending episode. This original title, Better to Sleep, essentially being an allegory for the death of both Clementine and a newborn AJ, and that it's better to die than to continue living in their position. As best said by this Reddit comment that best explains what happens in this cut final episode, Clem is left to wander in a blizzard with AJ, walking to a city/town that she can see from a distance. As she walks, the player was supposed to get the impression that AJ was progressively getting heavier and heavier. Both Clem and AJ are succumbing to hypothermia. The game was to prompt the player with two options after a long time of walking: leave AJ behind or hold AJ as you both die together. Option 1 has Clementine surviving and AJ dying alone, with option 2 killing both Clementine and AJ as they succumb to hypothermia and essentially freeze to death. This ending would have dramatically changed the rest of the series, which makes sense for the name, Better to Sleep. There's a lot of evidence supporting that this was almost canon, including a title card to the original episode, and it also being mentioned in the developer commentary for the episode. This one is true without a doubt. Wow. I can't even imagine season 2 ending like this because it just seems really extreme. And what makes this all the more chilling are the few remnants of what remains of this cut episode, such as the chilling soundtrack that would apparently play throughout the episode. And out of all the Walking Dead games, Season 2 would prove to be the one where most of these dark ideas and most good content from the series would stem from, as Season 2 went through a lot of changes as y'all just heard. This is barely scratching the surface of Season 2 and all the cut content in regards to it, and if you guys are still interested in all the other things that were cut from this game, the YouTuber InColdBlood has made many videos that cover the cut pieces of this game and also other Walking Dead games, so most definitely check them out if you guys are interested. But for a zombie series that is already filled with so much grit and sadness, that ending of Season 2 amplifies all those feelings into just pure depression and despair. Now, Breaking Bad, a show that similarly to the last entry is by no means a piece of media that is for the lighthearted, with it already hoisting a pretty dark story that gets amplified from the many deaths and consequences that follow the characters within the story. The critically acclaimed show written by Vince Gilligan follows Walter White, a struggling, frustrated high school chemistry teacher who transforms into a ruthless kingpin in the local methamphetamine drug trade, who is driven to provide for his family financially after being diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer. Alongside Walter as our main character, we also follow the secondary protagonist Jesse Pinkman, who is best known as the former business and meth cook partner of his former chemistry teacher Walter White, teaming up with Walter for 2 years to help him manufacture chemically pure crystal methamphetamine. Now, Breaking Bad is known to have a lot of cut alternative plot threads or endings that all happen within different points of the story, with most of these proposed ideas being between really brutal or really disturbing. An example of the more disturbing side of these ideas can be seen with the proposed death of Skylar White, who is Walter White's wife. In this proposed plot thread, Skylar kills herself by slitting her own wrist in the bathtub, which could have drove Walter into being more brutal and ruthless, which coincides with the more brutal side of these ideas, in which the writers of the show propose that Walter White would quote-unquote go full Rambo and kill a lot more in the later seasons. And of course, we never got any of that. And although all of that does seem a little bit out of character for the series, what we'll be focusing on for this entry in specific is the original plans Gilligan had for Jesse and Walter's son Walter Jr., which blended the brutal and disturbing aspects of the show into one, as Gilligan had originally planned to kill off Jesse, and the end result of his death making Walter be way more dangerous and unhinged. In this proposed version of the story, this death event would have happened in Season 1. Vince Gilligan at the time planned and wanted Jesse to die by the end of Season 1 by a drug dealer. I'm not too sure if this dealer was Tuco, who was an antagonist in Breaking Bad throughout Season 1. But yeah, Jesse Pinkman, who ultimately survived at the end of the show when most of the other main characters died, was supposed to be one of the first big deaths in the show. But going back to the entry at hand, Jesse dies by the hand of this dealer, and Walter would be filled with so much rage that he eventually kidnaps the killer and locks him up in his basement, in which Walter would torture the dealer every day in a brutal fashion. Eventually, Walter sets up a shotgun connected to a tripwire so that the dealer can opt out at any time, aka unalive himself at any time. But the dealer would always be quite stubborn and never actually opting out. And although this already sounds so out of character for Walter, what makes this all the worse is that Walter's son, Walter Jr., who is probably the most innocent person in this entire show, finds his contraption after stumbling down the basement, in which Walter Jr. sees the dealer in shackles and tries to help him. But as Walter Jr. approaches him, the dealer trips the wire, firing the shotgun, and ends up unaliving both Walter Jr. and himself. Luckily, some of the writing crew made Gilligan not go through with this, but what makes this entry all the more interesting is just how difficult it is to find information about this, as from what I can find online, nothing else is really out there that gives further information about this. But as we all can tell, Jesse and Walter Jr.'s death would have vastly changed the series forever. And as mentioned earlier, There's little to no information about this other than bits of pieces that we have to base what this supposed original story for Breaking Bad would have been. But this original plan would have ultimately just used Jesse as a plot device for Walter entering his villain era, it seems like. It's weird reading this because I just can't imagine this happening. I mean, Jesse is, in my opinion, the most important character in the show in regards to El Camino and the final stretch of Breaking Bad. So killing him so early would have just made the show probably a tad bit too dark. Meaning that the show probably wouldn't have become the powerhouse it is today if we didn't have the amazing chemistry between Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul. Cause in this original proposed idea for the show, Jesse would have been fucking dead. But, as always, I'm glad that they decided to give Aaron Paul the chance to bloom. We ended up getting a masterpiece in return, so... The real question that remains now is, how would have the rest of the series been shaped and ended if this did happen? And as morbid as this sounds, I kinda wanna see this happen, cause some of the best moments in Breaking Bad revolve when Walter's filled with rage and revenge. But then again, that unfortunately means that we don't see Jesse have a happy ending, and we never see Walter Jr. eat breakfast again, which is pretty damn heartbreaking if you ask me. But y'all let me know in the comments if y'all would have liked seeing this, and how do you think Breaking Bad would have ended if Jesse and Walter Jr. died early on?
But I had this image that Walt, I think it was going to be that Jesse gets killed in season 1. So this would happen like the end of season 1 or season 2 or something like this. And Walt is so filled with rage at the person, at the drug kingpin, drug dealer who kills Jesse, that he's out for revenge. And he takes it very personally. And he gets this guy, and this guy's a really tough, badass dude who's, really hardcore guy who you really would want to see something bad come to this guy. This is a character we never had. There's versions of this character in Gustavo Fring and in Tuco Salamanca and even in Crazy 8, but we never completely had this character realized.
Bob's Burgers is an animated sitcom created by Lauren Bouchard, which follows the Belcher family that consists of Bob, Linda, Tina, Jean, and Luis, in which basically this whole family runs a burger restaurant. The show throughout its decade-long run has amassed a huge following due to its calm and mellow wholesome take of an adult animated series. Comparing Bob's Burgers against something along the likes of Family Guy or South Park, you can see that there's a huge contrast in the way they all present itself, which isn't all too surprising as they're all different in many ways from one another. But although Bob's Burgers is pretty lighthearted in terms of an adult animated series, the show was supposed to be a lot more dark. In the original pitch of Bob's Burgers, the Belcher family was originally a family of cannibals, with the Belcher family using the restaurant they own as a way to serve human burgers and also to fuel themselves and dodge any suspicion. Alongside this original pitch, a 2-minute short demo was created, showing this original proposed idea of the show. In this original short, Bob and Linda are introduced as a couple grinding people's body parts in the basement to make burgers, in a crude art style that doesn't even come close to the show's current visuals. Linda is annoyed about Bob forgetting their wedding anniversary. Her frown is quickly turned upside down, however, when she notices a bodiless hand with a diamond ring that she believes Bob had gotten to her as a surprise. And although this original idea for the show was scrapped, the funny part about this is that Bob's Burgers' first episode, Human Flesh, actually imitates this original concept, albeit in a less graphic and more lighthearted way. Even though it's wild thinking that a wholesome show like Bob's Burgers could have ended up like this, the reason why at the time made a lot of sense, as the creator of Bob's Burgers, Bouchard, was just coming off of Adult Swim, and simply put, he believed that most adult animated shows needed to be shocking to maintain an audience, which, if you think about it, is pretty true, but at the same time, kinda false. Anyways, you may be asking, why did the show drastically change from cannibals to what we have now? And that would all be attributed to Fox, and more importantly, Fox's vice president at the time, who knew Bouchard from his past works and decided to talk Bouchard out of the cannibal idea, because although Fox did like the idea of Bob's Burgers, they felt as if the cannibalism would have greatly took a lot away from the show, which was honestly a pretty damn good call coming from Fox, as we ended up getting a show that superseded the notion of needing to be constantly edgy to maintain an audience. And as mentioned earlier, This was of course just an original pitch, with the idea being swiftly discarded on almost immediately. All we have now is just speculation about how the show would have been if this did happen, which, if you think about it, the show probably would have lost a lot of momentum early on if they decided to keep up with the theme. Cause what makes Bob's Burgers unique compared to all these other adult animated series is that Bob's Burgers is wholesome as hell. And you know, if you have cannibalism in there and these dark themes, then of course it's not really going to reflect well in the uniqueness of it. But it's still interesting nevertheless. But I'm assuming that the show probably would have showed the Belcher family buying corpses from Mort, which, if you didn't know, Mort owns a funeral home right next to Bob's Burgers, so make do what you will with that information and come up with your own speculation about what could have happened in this proposed idea if we did follow this original plan for Bob's Burgers. Well, that's it for now. And to preface everything, it's crazy thinking about how the early stages of a piece of media can be vastly different than what we have now in the present. As I stated back in the intro, these changes can really all be tied down to a domino effect by even the smallest of changes. And with all of that said, I just wanted to thank everyone for watching, and yeah, I have no better way to conclude this video other than thank you, and I'll see y'all next time. Wait. I have a quick announcement. And that's just mostly me wanting to apologize for going MIA for a while and just being relatively busy with a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't know how else to say this, but as you may or may not know, I edit everything using like a shitty phone and, you know, all these cheap free apps, and it just makes video creation become kind of a nuisance because there's just a lot more steps to doing something on a phone compared to a computer or something. But I do have good news, and that's that I'm getting a computer. And, you know, I got all the parts already. I'm just, you know, about to build it pretty soon, and hopefully there should be a good jump in quality in about everything. But I do want to like say something right now, and that's if I do take, you know, if I go MIA again, it's probably me just training my editing skills and just trying to set everything up right. As much as I hate saying this, I'm just kind of picky about how I, you know, do my videos and stuff, and that does delay the channel a lot, and I do apologize for that. I do want to get better at that, and just know that I do have big plans for this channel for 2024, and I just hope that you all can stick around to see what happens in the future. And with all of that, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to thank everyone for supporting the channel and for supporting everything and just being there. And, you know, it really does mean a lot, and I'm just really grateful that the last two videos got a lot of support, and people are commenting, people are just being really supporting and give me good criticism about how to make my videos better, and all of that. I do appreciate all of that, and just know that I'm working really hard to hopefully become better. And with that, yeah, I'm done, and yeah, I got nothing else to say, just that I'm very grateful and thank you for watching. So with that, I'll see you next time.